at the end of compressor washes. So today we're going to work on actually doing repairs to compressors, not just improving efficiency by washing the inside parts, but what do you actually physically do to the parts other than wash them. So the good news is that minor damage can be fixed, and aircraft mechanics get to do that. How many people in here have had the semester on propellers yet? Can you do minor repairs on propellers as a power plant mechanic? Can you do major repairs on propellers? No, you can't. Okay. So who can do major repairs on propellers? Yeah, certified repair station has to do the repair propeller blade, but not so with turbine with inside parts of turbines. Aircraft mechanics can do these repairs, but as soon as it turns into a major repair, who has to do it? Yeah, you have to have an AMT with an inspection authorization. So the day, go ahead. That's technically correct in that any human being, I'm saying that because we're excluding monkeys and dolphins, any human being can perform maintenance on an aircraft, can do repairs to aircraft. The person signing off the work has to supervise them, and then they have to return it to service, and then they have to write down the name of the person that did the work. There's an exception to this because I did say maintenance and repair. If you're doing an inspection, the human who is signing off the inspection has to actually do the inspection. So let's say, for instance, you get a brand new A&P mechanic, you're right out of school, you're going to go do a 100-hour inspection on a Cessna 1 Filthy 2 because you've done inspections on Cessna 1 Filthy 2 in school, you know how to do it, and you get your buddy Chris to help you out. Now, Chris can help take the airplane apart. They can clean spark plugs. They can repack wheel bearings. They can do all the work. You can actually stand there drinking adult beverages, sitting in the corner of the hangar, although you need to watch out that if you're supervising somebody, maybe you need to not drink adult beverages. So let's say you're sitting in the corner drinking Mountain Dew, Red Bulls, and you're eating peanut butter and sandwiches, and you're supervising the work that this person does. Once they've taken the aircraft apart, they can fix things as long as you're supervising them fixing things. But before the aircraft gets put back together, you as the new 100-hour inspection, you have to do all the inspection parts yourself. Now, that person can take the spark plugs out and clean them and gap them and get them ready to install, but you still need to look at the spark plugs before they go back into the engine. They can jack the airplane up and they can take the wheel bearings apart and they can clean them, but before they put grease back in the wheel bearings, you need to inspect the wheel bearings. So I want to make that really clear here. If you're an aircraft mechanic and you're supervising, because you're writing this down, if you're an aircraft mechanic and you're supervising somebody who's doing the work, you can supervise the work, but you're going to sign it off. You have to supervise them, and you have to write their name down in the logbook that says they did the work. So that's maintenance and repair. When it comes to inspections, you, the person signing it off, have to do the actual inspections. So, yes, Elizabeth, if you have an A&P, can you perform major repairs? Yes, but you may not return it to service and sign the logbook off. Let's say I had an inspection authorization and I supervised you doing a major repair to a turbine engine. I would be the one who signed the logbook, and I would have to write down that you did the made that. You would have to write your name in it. It's in FAR 43. Question? Who would get in trouble? Whoever signed it would get in trouble. Because it doesn't matter if the person doing the work has a mechanic certificate or not. And in fact, there would be no reason. It's not that it'd be against the law, but there'd be no reason for me to write down in the logbook that Elizabeth had an AMP. I would just write Elizabeth Beeler did the work, and then I'm the one who signs it. So as far as liability, as far as the FAA is concerned. Now, unfortunately, in the United States, we're a litigious society, and when I say litigious, that means everybody for everything. It doesn't mean that you're free from somebody suing, but it would be difficult for somebody to win a lawsuit against Elizabeth. She's going to say, I that signed it off. But this is America. Excuse me. Apostrophe M-E-R-I-C. This is America. Has anybody ever been to America? Nobody's been there? So you actually have to supervise them. That's why you need to not drink adult beverages while you're supervising them, because one could argue maybe you're not adequately supervising them. You have to supervise them. You have to list name of worker. Okay, well, in a moment, I'm going to show you where it is. And then I guess I'm going to write it. And certified mechanic. Signs the logbook. There it is. Inspection portion must be done by the certified mechanic. While I'm looking it up, I'm going to tell you what's very common in general aviation. And when I say very common, I won't say it's even 10% of the time, but it's not unheard of, and in fact I've done it myself, is to have what's called, and you don't have to write this part down, is what's called an owner-assisted annual inspection. So who has to do the inspection on an annual inspection? You have to have an AMP certificate, and you have to have that inspection authorization. Remember, to get an inspection authorization, you've got to have held your mechanic certificate for 3 years, and you must have actively been using it during the last 20 months out of that 3 years. Have to take this gnarly written test, and when it's gnarly, FAA doesn't publish the questions. Back when I took it, it was even gnarlier, but I won't go into the gnarliness of my knurled life. Can one have a knurled life? Kittrick. No, I let it go. Unfortunately, I made a mistake. I'd been working at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in northern Arizona, and once a year, the AMP school down at the junior college in Phoenix had an IA renewal seminar, and it always came up during spring break. So it was always easy for me to go. So the Friday before spring break, I had waited. This is my fault. It's all my fault. I waited until the Friday before spring break to look it up, and pow, it was happening that day. And so I couldn't go to it. And so I hadn't been doing maintenance on things for a long, long time, and I didn't have an aircraft, and at the moment there was no such thing as an online IA renewal back then. This was in the late 90s. Yeah, maybe it was early 2000s. It's not that the internet hadn't appeared, but everything was still black and white on the internet back in 1999. And in any case, so unfortunately I let it go. And it was all my fault. If I had to do things over again, I would do something. I would have done it. So Elizabeth said something rather interesting, that she had not heard of this thing where if somebody else does the work, then you have to write their name down, and this is in FAR 43. Maintenance, let's see, persons authorized, let's see if it's in that one. Records. Here we are. FAR 43.9. The name of the person performing the work, if other than the person specified in paragraph A4 of this section, and the person specified in A4 of this section is the person that's returning it to service, the person that's authorized to do the work. In our case, you either have an AMT mechanic certificate so you can do minor repairs and minor alterations, or you have an AMT with an inspection authorization so you can do minor repairs. Correction, major, also, you can also do major repairs and major alterations. And then that second part for inspections, AMPs can do 100-hour inspections, but you need an AMP with an IA to do annual inspections. So I was talking about owner-assisted annual inspections. So you don't have to write this down, but I'm going to give you the story because it's important, because you're probably going to end up doing this at some point in your career. So let's say you get your AMP, you have it for 3 years. If you've been actively using it during the last 24 calendar years, you go take the gnarly test, and you get your inspection authorization, IA. You don't get an extra card from the FAA. I don't know what it is now. Back when I had it, it was a piece of yellow paper. And it expires every 2 years. You don't have to write that down. Okay, so you have your IA, and a friend of yours has an airplane, and they want you to do the annual inspection on it, and they want to save money, or will take it to a shop, and they say, I want to save money and not pay you all the labor. I want to do as much of the labor as the owner as I possibly can. And you go, well, okay, and a lot of shops, because if you let that person into your shop, and they're not an employee, are they covered by your insurance? Not that pay issue. Okay, another is they have a hangar, so they do it in the hangar. So what you do, we'll do it in the hangar, you take the airplane, and I'll supervise. And then after it's all taken, I'll do the inspection, I'll supervise putting it back together again, and then after we're all done, when I'm happy, I'll sign off the annual inspection. There's some significant issues surrounding this besides the insurance part. Is number one, how are you going to supervise this person doing it if it's in their hangar and you're not there? The FAA, I could go back to FAR 43, it says supervise, but it doesn't say you have to supervise in person. So it's really up to the mechanic, or in this case an AMP with an inspection authorization, it's really up to this IA to decide how much do you have to supervise. So generally, the first time you do an owner-assisted annual inspection with the owner as the IA, you're going to supervise them a lot. You're going to be at the hangar a lot to make sure they're not doing anything stupid. And it's not so bad when the airplane apart. And after you finish the inspection, and putting it back together again correctly. Physically there to make sure they're doing it right. So that's up to you. I'm telling you to decide the level of supervision that you need in order. And so you'll sign it off. The owner takes it apart. They write up a list of discrepancies, and somebody has to fix it. There's a few things pilots can fix, like they can do minor fiberglass repairs. They can do some painting if it doesn't involve a flight control that needs to be balanced. They can do spark plugs. They can do the battery. They can do wheels and wheel bearings. They can do I'd have to look up to see if they can do lubrication. I'd have to look at that one. They can do engine oil changes and engine oil filter changes. So there's some things they can do, and on their own signature. So they could actually do that and sign it off as a pilot, but we'll get to that some other time. But whatever gets fixed, if it's the repair part, they can do it as long as you're supervising them, and then you're going to sign off that that person did the work, but you're going to sign off that it was done correctly. That's like that part where it says the person that did the work, you have to list their name. Okay. Then you come in and you do all the inspection. you check cable tension and you do the compression test and 27 different other things, and you make sure you're very happy with the airplane, that it's all in airworthy condition, and that all the repairs that needed to have been done, you've supervised it correctly. Now comes the tricky part. Actually, how much of those repairs did you let supervising them? And if the owner in this case, who's probably also a pilot, as they put together, how much do you need to supervise them? Do you need to watch them torque the spark plugs? Do you need to watch them torque the wheel after they put the bearings and the wheel back together again? Do you need to watch them when they torque down the seat belt attachment bolts? These are interesting questions that you get to decide how much supervision that person needs, because at the end you're going to write repairs that were done, and if somebody else did them, you're going to list the name, and then you're going to say, I certify I have inspected this aircraft in accordance with an annual inspection and find it to be in airworthy condition, and then you're going to sign it off because you did the inspecting part. So I'll tell you a little story. So I started doing this since I didn't maintain my IA. I started doing owner-assisted annuals with a gentleman I knew that worked at the same place I did. He was the director of maintenance in IA. And so I asked him one time, hey, I want to do an owner-assisted annual on the airplane. The boss said I could use an empty hangar for a couple of weekends. Would you be willing to do it? And he said, sure. So I took the airplane apart, and I had an AMT, so I inspected the airplane in accordance with a 100-hour inspection. What's the difference between a 100-hour inspection and an annual inspection? Nothing other than the person who did it and why you need to do it, which we're not going to go into today. So I inspected 100-hour/annual inspection, and then I fixed everything that was a minor repair. And that was the only thing wrong with it. So and then since I had an A&P, I signed off the work because I did it. And I didn't put anybody's name in it, and I didn't have to sign it off either. Then fixed everything. Then I called up the person and said, hey, you want to come out and do the annual inspection? I got the airplane taken apart. And he said, sure. So he comes out and he inspects everything, spark plugs, all that stuff. I got the airplane packs and the wheel bearings out, clean but not greased back up again, all ready so everything can be inspected. I've got the tensionometer out for the cables so he can check the tension on the cables. The works. So he comes out with a flashlight and an inspection mirror, and of course I have the maintenance manual out with a nice list of things to inspect, and he goes through it and he inspects the entire aircraft, and he finds a thing or two, some chafing between. I remember this very vividly. He found some chafing between a couple of lines in the engine compartment that I hadn't noticed. I mean, they weren't chafing, but they were touching, and they were going to chafe. So that was the one repair I made that I missed, and that he found. And then he asked me about how I was going to, what was the spark plug torque, how was I going to put the wheel bearings back together. And he was satisfied, and he was satisfied that I put the airplane back together again. So I put the airplane back together again, and now he comes back and looks at everything, makes sure I put it back together correctly, and he signed off the annual inspection. So that was just that since I had an A&P, I could do any of the minor repairs, and we're not going to get into it. But pilots on an airplane, there's and sign it up. If you have an A&P, there's a much greater number of things you can do. And so I've been doing that every year because it saves me a whole lot of labor. I don't have to pay an aircraft mechanic. The IA, I don't have to pay anybody to take the airplane apart. I don't have to pay anybody to fix anything. I don't have to pay an aircraft mechanic to put the airplane back together. I just have to pay the inspection of the authorized inspector, the inspection authorization person. I just have to pay them for the inspections that they do. All right, so let's see. We talked about minor damage can typically be repaired, and here's the key part to repairs on these aircraft engines is you can't exceed, how come I'm not drawing ink here? There we go. You cannot exceed allowable limits on how big the damage is. Obviously, it's going to be in the maintenance manual, but that's arguably, in addition to, once you find the damage, you have to check and look at it and go measure it and say, is the damage so big that it can't be repaired? Because that's really going to be the big issue. How about, who said there was more than one person that said they had the semester on propellers? And propellers, if it's out near the tips, can you have big repairs, relatively speaking? Well, can you have small repairs? If there's nicks, can you file out nicks and stuff like that? The closer you get towards the center of the propeller, the hub, when you're close to the hub, what kind of repairs can you do to propellers? Yeah, sometimes you can't do any damage to the propeller. Sometimes close to the hub means the propeller's no good anymore. It's because near the center, there's not as much, there's a whole lot of stress because it's holding all the stress and all the centrifugal force of the entire blade. Well, it varies by propeller. The closer you get to the hub, the smaller the nick that can be. You need more strength, yes, because you need more strength at the center of the propeller near the hub than you do going out towards the tips. So you need that strength because you're holding the entire propeller on, and the thing is flinging around, spinning around really fast. And generally speaking, this says the outer half of the blade generally speaking, has noticeably bigger damage. So if here was a blade, a compressor blade, and here's where it attaches. The outer half is the part that's spinning faster. That outer half generally can have bigger damage and still repair it than the inner. Outer half, generally speaking, can have more damage and still be repaired than the inner half. In fact, I'm going to show you some diagrams here before today is over, and the closer you get, this part, the attachment part, has the least amount of damage that is still acceptable to get repaired. Okay, you can, if the blade is, what does the blade have to be able to do a magnetic particle inspection? It's got to be made of what or what or what? Okay, it's got to be ferrous. Tell me the 3 ferrous metals. Say that again? Steel is made out of carbon and iron. I would accept steel on the test. Nope, copper. Can it be picked up by a magnet? Say that again? Nickel and cobalt. Excellent. Iron. Let's see if I can draw here. See if it'll let me. Iron, nickel, and cobalt are the 3 common elements on the planet Earth that can be picked up by magnets. Aluminum isn't magnetizable, copper isn't magnetizable, silver is not magnetizable, magnesium is not magnetizable, chrome is not magnetizable. What have I left out? Not magnetizable. I've read about this a lot. And we don't see that much gold in, the problem with gold, it's very malleable, it's kind of soft, so you tend to not see it in aircraft structural material where you're going to do magnetic particle inspections. So this is a really good test question right here. What does a blade in a turbine engine have to be made of in order to do a magnetic particle inspection? It's got to be made of, it's got to have iron or cobalt or nickel in it. Otherwise, it doesn't do any good. However, you can have penetrant inspections. I personally like the fluorescent penetrant inspections. And that doesn't matter what the material is made out of. So generally speaking, if you have inspection, significant particle inspections. Well, it does have to be a ferrous material. Okay, so let's think of this, the next one, the second one. It has to be what? No, actually it doesn't have to be surface damage. That's an advantage of magnetic particle inspection, is that it'll actually pick up subsurface damage. That's actually will only pick up surface damage. That's dye penetrance will only pick up surface defects. Yeah, I think it does take a lot of skill to be able to do it correctly. Once you're done with the part, generally, what do you have to do to it? You have to do what? Demagnetize it, yeah. So here's an interesting thought. How about stainless steel? How easy is it to magnetize stainless steel? Yeah, most types of stainless steel used on airplanes and helicopters are not easily magnetized. This would not work on some. Titanium is not magnetized. Okay, I won't argue with that. I will argue that I've never seen a titanium component be listed as needing a magnetic particle inspection. Because what you need is something that is easily and well magnetized. Otherwise it won't work very well. And my guess is that titanium alloy has iron or cobalt or nickel in it. It may be mostly titanium. Oh. Right, but still, if it's mostly not iron, cobalt, or nickel, then it's almost for sure magnetic particle inspection won't work very well. So magnetic particle inspection or some type of penetrant inspection, and of course the downside here is it's got to be surface cracks. That's a disadvantage. And cracks. No cracks. No cracks. When we're talking surface damage, we're talking about a nick, a scratch, something has effectively hit the surface, and we're just going to smooth out that surface. We're going to sew that easily instead of coming up against that nick and then concentrating. This gentleman has some reason. He can demonstrate it, let's put it this way, easier than I can in class. So it's a 44-minute video.
We just picked up current from the state.
But we're only going to watch about 5 or 6 minutes of it from right about here.
First thing we want to do is go along the edge and see if there's any major damage versus the erosion. So it looks pretty good, I'm losing focus here.
Does anybody notice something interesting about the way he has this blade attached to the vise? There's no padding. I know you have like a titanium blade. I just can't see clamping it down in a vise where you don't have something soft like aluminum or wood holding it in place. So oh, this gentleman, you've seen this gentleman? Okay. Yeah, so if they fly apart, nobody cares. And let me phrase that. No one will die as easily due to crashing an aircraft. They'll just die from uncontained. They'll die from uncontained.
While spending the least amount of time, pretty much regardless of effort. But time is of the essence. Okay. So let's go through those steps right now.
I was listening to him talk about this.
First thing we want to do is go along the edge and see if there's any major damage versus the erosion. So it looks pretty good,
Except for the corrosion.
I'm losing focus here. Okay, that's better. We can see right there is a small impact or nick that we're going to have to blend out. So let's work on that first. We're going to take a file. It's kind of a medium-sized file. I know it looks small, but we don't need any big tools for this. And we're going to round out or increase the radius of this nick. So let's see if we can do that with some skill. It's hard to get started. This is called crossfiling, where going across the surface. It's the way that files are almost always used. It's not the only way. Okay, so we've put a little divot there. We've increased the radius of the nick considerably. And now we've got a little bit extending past the depth of the radius to the tip. So we're going to take that off. Which takes some serious filing. Okay, that's step one. We have basically removed the nick and the excess material above it. But now what we've got to do, we've got to take what we've made a square edge to this. We've got to restore the airfoil. So a little bit of filing on the underside. More filing on the top. We don't really want to get a sharp edge. We want to get just it's like the leading edge of a wing, which is exactly what it is. Okay, that's all the cross filing we're going to do. That is. Okay, now we've got this roughness here and all this surface roughness along there. We're going to do what's called draw filing, which is taking the file like this and moving it in this direction. So let's do that. And keep in mind that there's twist here, so I have to keep changing the angle as I go. I'll show you the...
So did you see all that corrosion, that pitted corrosion that was on it when he started? So I don't think you're going to find corrosion on an engine that's been in service anywhere near that bad, because to me it makes me think this engine's been sitting around for years and years. It was on a boat? Ah, well, salt air is bad.
Crossfiling. If I was to crossfile it...
I don't know, I'm starting to wonder if he may have some kind of padding in here. I see this little, he might have something in here. Maybe that thing's made out of aluminum.
This is a wing, that's how it works. I'm just going to move the vise a bit so I can, I got to get this underside here of the leading edge. This is the fastest way to remove the metal without wrecking the blade.
So if he was working on real live aircraft, the very first thing he would have done after he inspected the damage would be to look in the maintenance manual and say, on this part of the blade, how deep can this damage be, and I can still repair it and it's still going to be airworthy. A single word about on the half of the blade there can be more damage, or on the inside half of the blade there can be less damage, and he's not even saying how much damage there can be, which obviously is explained by the fact that he's not doing this to an airworthy standard. Water standards?
Okay, and you've basically got to guess. You can't tell if you're all the way done until you do the next step, but you can always back up. Down here is critical. You want to really try to get that nice and smooth, because obviously this is the root of the blade. The forces on the leading edge increase as you get towards here because of both leverage and weight that are above whatever location there is. Okay, let's take a look at this edge. Okay, there's our leading edge. I'm hoping the focus...
See, I'm looking at this right in here, and I'm just going, ah! When I see that. If that's actually missing metal right there, the likelihood of this being airworthy, repairable to an airworthy standard is pretty close to zero. Because this is where there's huge amount of stress, where the length of the blade goes 90 degrees, where it attaches. This is generally speaking where the least amount of damage can occur and have it still be repaired to an airworthy standard.
This will stay. The craters are gone, but we've got a rough, ragged edge. And you saw how long that took. It was quite effective. Well, there's a few more. Well, it feels not bad, actually. Sorry about the focus. Some emery cloth, 100 grit. Could use sandpaper. Emery cloth has just got a cloth background. So
does anybody know the major difference between sandpaper and emery cloth? What does emery cloth generally not have in it? But how many people have worked on propellers? Do you get to use sandpaper on propellers or emery cloth? Okay, emery cloth. Why not use sandpaper? Yeah, what's in sandpaper that's not in emery cloth? It's not carbon, because carbon itself doesn't cause corrosion. No, it's the other way around. Sandpaper may use metal crystals in it. So if you're sandpapering on an aluminum propeller, iron in it, and put it into the aluminum, now you could have dissimilar metal corrosion. So when he says sandpaper, it's like, no. You want to use emery cloth because it's not going to embed any metal into the blade.
it's a bit more durable.
But maybe it
I like to
doesn't matter
fold it
that
in
much
three.
on boats.
That way it gives me a little bit of cushioning and it doesn't slide around. Yeah, you can see the whole thing here. The one thing you want to be careful about when blending, and you just go like this, is going past the edge and pulling back, because that's a square edge and it will rip your thumb or your finger wide open. So when you're doing this many times a day, right there. So I will show you a way to prevent that
gloves
in a second. Now this is very aggressive sandpaper. What we're doing is we're removing the file marks. Okay? The draw filing removed the cross file marks. The rough sandpaper is removing the draw file marks. And it'll get quite smooth here. Notice I'm being quite careful at the corner there, because that's an injury that is no fun. Okay, polishing up nicely. Now it's hard to get here. This is a hard area to get polished. So one of the things you can do is you can take one of these little tiny files and wrap the sandpaper around it and use it as a little tool like that. Okay, because this little notch right here is a very important part to be nice and smooth. Now this is a scrap blade, but we're going to try to do a really good job on it. I'm going to try.
Okay, there he did. He said it's a scrap blade. So that brings up a good point. You're taking an aircraft engine apart, you're inspecting it, you find a blade that's out of limits, that is, the damage is deep into the blade than is authorized to repair. What do you do with this blade? Just, someone says throw it away, someone says not throw it away. Just give it to somebody? Oh man, I would totally sell it to them. Give it away? What if, how much, if this is made out of some interesting alloys, might it be worth money selling it for scrap? Probably going to sell it for scrap. I worked at this helicopter outfit, and when the helicopter came in, hit 2,000 hours, it would come back to the factory back then, and we'd overhaul it, because at that time the factory was the only place you could overhaul it. And pretty much anything on the helicopter that spun around either got overhauled or it hit its life limit, and we threw it away. The main rotor blades on these helicopters, there's actually a couple of these main rotor blades, engine stands with the Continental O200s on them. That's out of a Robinson R-22. It's a little two-seat helicopter, goes about 100 miles an hour. Those blades had a life limit of 2,000 hours. That is, when they hit 2,000 hours, no matter how good they were, you couldn't reuse them. You couldn't overhaul them, you couldn't repair them, you couldn't inspect them, you couldn't do anything to them to make them airworthy. So we took two sawhorses and put them about 10 feet apart and put a blade between someone who was usually the heaviest person around, which therefore would step on the center of that blade and bend it. And then we'd continue and fold, so it was folded in half. Number one, and most importantly, no one would ever be able to straighten that out a million gazillion wrinkles and try to pass it off as an airworthy blade. And number two, it made it fit into the dumpster outside. So what I said again, I don't recall if anybody ever took them home for art. Another great technique that I've seen is to take a hacksaw and go into the component in an obvious place, in an obvious, very large enough cut, so that no human being could see that who had any reasonable knowledge, and accidentally say, oh, that's an airworthy part. Has anybody ever heard of the term counterfeit parts? But existing problem in aviation. Unscrupulous, illegal, immoral, and unethical aircraft maintenance personnel will take an aircraft part that's hit its life limit, and then they will forge paperwork to say that it hasn't hit its life limit, and then turn around and sell it. Me personally, I think that's second-degree murder, if you ask me, but attempted second-degree murder, because you know you're putting someone's life at risk. But hey, that's just me. So what you can do to prevent anybody from doing that is if you find a life-limited component, or one that you think might be in the hands of somebody else because it's not going into the scrap heap, is to take a hacksaw to it. In fact, I've seen places where when they take the blades off and they decide it's unairworthy, before they put it in the scrap heap, they will cut it. Because there is one big story about a company who was buying the scrap engine parts from 727's engines. This was about 20 years ago, and they were buying those parts and then taking those parts and cleaning them off, making them pretty, even though they were out of the turbine section and they had a limit and that had been hit, and so they forged them all up and made them pretty. That was not just the parts into a 55 for scrap. They turned on a bandsaw and went zoom, and cut a nice groove in it before they threw it in the scrap heap. I mean, right? Somebody's life is in danger. I thought it was a pretty good idea to cut slots in it.
Okay. Now, the way to avoid tearing your finger open is to use a piece of wood or rubber, which I don't have right now. You place the blade close enough to the surface that you can't go past it with your finger, for example like this, and then you can blend and sand away all day without ripping open your finger, because this corner will go through the sandpaper into your finger, and that's no fun. Okay, we're halfway there. Let's take a look at the leading edge of the blade once we've used the file and the rough sandpaper.
The emery cloth to it.
There we go. Significant improvement in the pitting and cratering. Still not beautiful, but looking much better. And we've preserved the aerodynamic leading edge, which is very hard to tell like this. I've got some other samples I'll show you in a second. And let's finish this off.
Still got some sanding to do. Correction, some emery clothing to do.
Okay, for the final finishing step, we have some 400 grit sandpaper. And I fold it like this again. Just seems to work best. And we're going to be careful with that edge.
I think we've seen enough of filing.
And I'm just going to sand it. And I can see as it's polishing up, I'm going to need to use the rough sandpaper again, because I've got some file marks still.
Go away. Alright. So generally speaking, whatever working you're doing, unless otherwise specified, so he did do a reasonable job there, perform parallel to the length of the blade. Generally, as much of that as possible. Because if you did have any minor defects done because of your emery clothing, as long as they're parallel to the length of the blade, then the stress won't be accumulated right in that one spot. And of course, By hand is really it means that you're not using tools. So generally, no power tools. Why not use power tools? It's not like, you know, if the engine manufacturer didn't say I can't use power tools, why would I not use power tools? They're harder to control, and you're much more likely to damage the blade and take off more metal than you were planning. And the cost of paying you an extra 10 minutes on that blade is way, way less than the cost of you using a power tool and ruining it. What if that blade's worth $500? I'm making up a number. So you got a compressor blade that's worth $500 and you use a power tool on it and you ruin it. Wouldn't it have been better to pay you an extra $20 to work on it for an hour than to ruin a $500 blade? Yes. So no power tools. And of course, we've seen files, we've seen emery cloth, and there's a thing called India stones, which we'll get to shortly. And we're not even going to use power tools when it's time to buff the blade. We are going to pay attention to the surface finish. We're going to try to get that surface finish as smooth as the original blade. So you're going to go to finer and finer and finer emery cloth towards the end. Has anybody ever used an India stone? Has anybody ever sharpened a blade on a sharpening stone? Okay, well, it's softer than that, but all I could find was a picture. Interestingly enough, where I found it was rather interesting. What's that? No, I found it at a gun supply store. Pardon me? Well, I'm not familiar with gunsmithing. Let's see. Things that you want to be really smooth. Well, I was hoping that I thought I could open expanded view. There we go. So you'll notice, it's hard to see from way back there, that you notice that here's an oval, here's another oval, here's a triangle. I can't tell what this shape is. Yeah, square, rectangle, rectangle. So this is going to wear down like a stone would, but instead of you moving the blade against this stone, you're going to move the stone against the blade. So it's abrasive. It's just that it's going to be smaller, smaller, smaller marks than a file would be. So effectively, you're going to use files, you're going to use stones, and you're going to use succeedingly finer and finer levels of emery cloth to get that damage so that the damage doesn't exist. And so here is a picture of different types of damage. I'm not going to make you memorize any types of damage, but you'll notice these are not, you can't fix these with a compressor wash. You can't fix these with a compressor wash. You will remember, of course, if it's cracked, that generally means, can you fix the blade if it has cracks on it? Yeah, pretty much never. Well, as long as you're putting it in that boat jet engine, then that'll be just fine. So here's my favorite diagram of all of these diagrams, and I know the numbers are hard to see in the back, but effectively, first I'm going to say that the red up here is area A. Area A says it can be a 5/16 inch radius. That means more than 1/4 of an inch. Holy mackerel. And then area B here, this is area B, it can be 1/32 deep. And area C, which is the leading edge and the trailing edge, can be 5/32 deep. And you'll notice that area D down here is 1/32 deep. So in general, when we go from the tip of the blade, when we go from the tip of the blade towards the root of the blade, the amount of damage can be less and less and less. I don't want you to memorize any particular damage number on blades, but what you do need to understand is the farther out towards the tip, generally speaking, the bigger the damage that can be repaired, and the closer you get towards the root, the smaller and smaller damage is still acceptable and can still be repaired. Does anybody have any questions about that? And obviously, at least I think it's obvious, every set of blades in every engine is going to have a different set of depth of damage. And you can't just say, okay, I've done this before on that engine, now I'm on this blade. And in fact, from one set of blades to another set of blades inside the same engine, the damage could be different. And here's a nice picture where it shows the damage on the far left here. Here's a big gouge out of it, and here's approximately what the repair would look like. And here is a blade that's been damaged at the tip. And this is over-exaggerated. You'd never be able to blend out a tip this big. But effectively, the corners on the blades can usually be taken, some can be taken off of it. Alright, we're not going to go over that chart. Alright, so we have finished the compressor section and class is dismissed.